Today's reading is from John chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only. Law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but God, the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known.
I like this picture. I've shared several in this Advent from other cultures. This is a sort of cultural crossover in a sense, in as much as it's actually painted originally by a nun of Irish extraction who was living in New Zealand but was particularly concerned with the life of Maori people. It's a Madonna and Child picture, and it's called The Tears, or just Tears. Not sure if you can, no, it doesn't quite come out because it's quite subtle, but on Mary's cheek there is, when you see the original, thank you, Mark. My Bible's arrived from Cannington. You are a star. Thank you. There's a little tear on Mary's cheek because she's thinking about the future. She's thinking about the pain in the world, the pain that her child must face, the way the world will treat her child, the way the world is, and therefore the pain she herself will feel. And I quite like it. Just thought I would share it. It's not a million miles away from my next picture. The picture depicts a bushfire in Australia, which, if you've been listening or following any news kind of feeds of any sort, you'll be aware there's been an epic scale of bushfires in the area west and north of Sydney, huge area, and so forth. And you may have noticed that the Prime Minister was criticised for being on holiday at the time. That's not my main argument with him, but I was really pleased to learn this morning. My microphone, which means it's getting very echoey, isn't it? Okay, so I was really pleased to hear this morning that Mr. Morrison has changed his tune. He says now, and which I for once agree with him, he says, you cannot link any specific climate event to climate change, so the bushfires cannot be guaranteed the result of climate change, but that the evidence for climate change is irrefutable. This is from one of three world leaders who has been denying climate change. And you're going, Chris, you can't do climate change at Christmas, for goodness sake. Come on, can we just have Christmas without the climate change? The answer is, if you do that, you destroy the meaning of Christmas, right? You miss the whole Christmas thing. Because I'm going to say to you that never, in the whole history since before and after Jesus came, has it been made more clear that the right way to live on the earth is to love your neighbour as you love yourself. And managing our lives towards modifying the effects of climate change is a simple matter of loving your neighbour as yourself. People will die today because we are putting CO2 into the atmosphere too fast, right? It's not something that might happen in the future. Every single major aid agency from the UK publishes the same information and says, this is happening now. We are causing death and suffering now. It happens, and the Prime Minister of Australia is right. You can't say an individual event is necessarily the result of climate change. It could have resulted from something else. That's not the point. It's when they are a constant factor. And as one climate scientist said just about 10 days ago, it's that what is occurring on the button to the scientific forecasts, except it's happening faster than we imagined. But the last 40 years, it's absolutely working as science predicts. Okay, so if a world leader, and there's now only 2 left of any substance, denies climate change, they are lying because they know that it's real. They are lying for the short-term convenience of their political career. It's the only possible explanation. It's not possible to run a modern country and not know that climate change is the biggest threat to human life that we have ever faced. And it's a simple matter of loving your neighbour as yourself, the very message that Jesus was born in Bethlehem to bring to us, or at least part of that message. Surely there's never been a time when we should most urgently take note of the gospel of Christmas time. Christmas is more relevant now than ever before to the world as a whole. Because if now we started treating the world as if it belonged to God rather than us, if we now loved God with everything, including our treatment of the planet, then the mess would not be there and we would start putting it right. And if we would now love our neighbour as ourselves, we would change our behaviours and we could handle this issue that's in front of us. But the human race, the entire humanity, have to get our act together within about 10 years if we're going to manage this at all, right? That's what we have to do, something like that. You know, we can argue, well, it might be 15 years, Chris. Well, it might be. But it might be 9 or 7, because so far things have gone quicker than predicted, not as predicted. Okay? So this we know. The way we have run the world up to now has broken and disappointed us. It kills people, and it kills the earth. The way God has told us in Scripture to behave does not lead to the same thing. The problem is greed and a lack of love for God and neighbour. The biggest sin in the Bible, in terms of loving your neighbour as yourself and so forth, is always greed. It's not always highlighted as that, but if you read the Bible through, it's down there in black and white, unmistakable, almost every page. The main problem, the main sin, is the sin of greed and the fear that sometimes feeds that greed, which comes from a lack of faith. And we are called to what Jesus called us to. And never before have we needed so urgently in the now, not just thinking about our eternal futures and so forth, but in the now. Never before have we needed Christmas to be Christmas, where we receive the help that God has sent into the world, and we receive him whose name is Jesus. And we follow him and live as he taught us to live. It's really, really important. And it is incredible good news that there is still hope, there's still time, that there's solutions, there's ways we can respond, but we do have to kick out the ways that history has practiced for generations, because those things kill, maim, hurt, and deprive. And it is time to welcome Jesus and the things that Jesus teaches humanity into the center ground. And that's the way forward in the very practical immediate. The opening of that reading from John's Gospel does not sound, at first hearing, as if it's concerned with the practical realities of living on planet Earth at all, because it looks into eternity, to before there was even a universe and so forth. But nonetheless, it's where John chooses to begin his good news for the whole world, that is Jesus. And he's very smart, is John, and I would love to start there as well. So today I bring you a little meditation on the opening words of John's Gospel, and I promise you that taking even a fragment of it on board changes life epically. It sounds kind of illogical, jumbled, and difficult to grasp. It's not jumbled, it's not illogical, it's impossible to grasp though. And the purpose of John writing it is not that we suddenly understand it all, because we won't. This is about God. If you could understand everything about God, who would you be? Yeah. Are you God? No. So, okay, neither am I. We're not, even together we're not. We're just not going to understand everything about God. That does not mean that we cannot grasp things about God, and it does not mean that the truth about God cannot grasp us. It does not mean that it's not real or important. You can't swim out into the middle of the Atlantic off, say, the North Devon coast or the Cornish coast, and dive down to the deepest point in the Atlantic Ocean floor. You just can't do it, right? You'll die trying. It's completely beyond your eye just to walk into the sea off Newquay or something, swim out to the deepest point, and then swim down to the very deepest floor of the middle of the Atlantic. You just will die. It's just beyond you. That doesn't mean that it's illogical to think that the Atlantic has an ocean depth. It doesn't mean there's no sea. It doesn't mean there's no bottom to the sea. And it doesn't mean there's no you. It just means it's there. You can comprehend it. You can even touch it. You can swim in it. You can immerse yourself in it. But there's depths to which you will not be going. There's places you will not be able to reach. But they're real, and they're out there. And you can get a sense of them from just going rock pooling, for goodness sake. You can get a sense of them. And so with John's Gospel, we're going to do a little rock pooling, so that we get a sense of what we cannot actually fully comprehend. In the beginning. Now, when I inquire of the beginning of John's Gospel, I sometimes imagine what it might be like to sit down with John in heaven or somewhere and talk to him about my problems with his writing. So I sometimes almost hear my investigation like a conversation. Well, John, what do you mean in the beginning? And John says to me, Chris, pay attention. You know, because you've got a Bible, and you know that it starts with the words of the book of Genesis, in the beginning. I'm talking about that thing, the beginning, before there was a universe, before there were any universes at all, before there was something called time, before everything. And when it came to be the moment for stuff to begin, for time to start, for a universe to be born, and stuff to start happening. That's what I'm talking about. That's the beginning. That's what I mean when I say in the beginning. I'm reminding you of Genesis, which I hope you've taken seriously and sought to try and understand something of its message and why it's in my Bible and what it's got to say to you and about how you live and what your world is and what your life's about and stuff. Okay, John, yeah, move on. So say, okay, Chris, in the beginning was the Word. And I go, no, just a minute, John. In the beginning was God. He said, Chris, read Genesis, and you'll see that God has a word. And that everything that has been made was made through God expressing himself in his word. You'll see that Genesis says, and God said, and it became so. And you'll notice that all creation happens by God commanding it to exist. It comes from nothing and exists because God has commanded it to exist. That's why it exists. It's his word, which comes from in him, just like your words, Chris, come from inside you. And you'll, by the way, the same as me, folks. When you go to say something, what you are saying is out loud. You're giving a word, but you're saying something about what's going on in your head and your heart. You're expressing your thoughts and or your feelings. The word was originally in you and is part of you, but now it comes out of you. Have you noticed, by the way, folks, that sometimes when you've got something really, really urgent and important and big to say, that you can't speak as fast as you think? No. Yeah? Yeah, you can't. None of us can speak as fast as we think. Because we think just over twice as fast, but we think with the words. The words are actually a major part of how we think. We don't say, I've got a thought, now I need words, this is what I can say. The thought you're having in words. Have a look at your own thoughts sometimes. And you'll realize that a lot of your thinking, not all of it, but a lot of your thinking is done with the words that you've learned. So the words take form inside you first and foremost. They're you. They're the same as you. And then out they come. You speak them out. And suddenly they're out there. They're not just in here. They're out there, and other people can respond to what you've said. So John is saying to me, Chris, pay attention and understand that in the beginning, God had a creation inside of him. In his thinking, in his thoughts, in his feelings. He had this fantastic idea. And he had a purpose inside of him. You know what that purpose is, don't you, Chris? And I go, yeah, because we come to it later in your gospel endlessly. His purpose is love. Yeah, that's right. That's why there's a creation in the first place. And he's had this love inside of him. And he's got this purpose inside of him. And he spits it out. He speaks it out. He pushes it out into existence, and it ceases to be only inside of him, and it now has another expression as well. It's called creation, and it all takes place, if you pay attention to your Genesis, Chris, in the speaking of his word. So that is why I start my message about Jesus, which you need to hear in an era of climate change, this way, by saying, before there was anything, before there was time, before there was space, before there was anything that you can recognize in the universe or of the universe or whatever, before any of that, in eternity, the Word was in God. and was nothing but God. So the Word was God. He was both with God and was God, both at the same time. I said, just a minute, John, you can't have anything that is with something and is the same thing all at the same time. You're either it or you're with it. You can't be both with it and it at the same time. Oh, yes, we do. Aha. And it was. So, John's pointing out to me, and you, if you're a person like me who thinks like me and so forth, that actually, if you're God, it's not only possible, but it's inevitable that the Word would be both the same as God and with God in the beginning. That's not what it's like for us in everyday experience, because that's the universe and the physics of the universe. But before the physics of the universe, if you think about it long enough, Chris, you will have to come to the conclusion that God's Word, that urge within him, that thought, had to be expressed at some point. But whilst it was in him forever, it was the same as him, because there wasn't another thing. There was God. And so it's the same as him, and it's with him, and he spoke it out, and things came to exist. So in the beginning, Chris, was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Got it? And I go, well, not really, John, but close. I think I sort of get the edge of it. He says, same as me, mate, don't worry. He said, I've never understood it, I just wrote it down. Here comes the most extraordinary thing. He says, now that's all in the beginning, Chris, but now we step into time and space and history. And brace yourself for this. That Word that was in God in eternity became a biological reality in the universe. I go, what? And he goes, yes, Chris, listen. I'll put it this way. The Word, which was always in God, which is always with God and always was God, the Word, that aspect of God, if you like, that is his Word, that his thought, his feeling, his intention, his purpose, and he wants to speak out, and he speaks out, and stuff happens. So that Word entered the universe, entered nature, entered living nature, became a biological thing, became a baby in Bethlehem. And I go, you've got to be kidding. He says, no, I'm not. This is called the gospel. This is amazing. God so loves the world, that is his brilliant, great idea, that he sent his only Son into it. And that's who the baby of Christmas is. It's God's Word become biology, become human reality. It's amazing stuff, isn't it? I mean, you don't get this off your Christmas cards. This you get from John's Gospel, and it's a brilliant truth. But don't worry the fact that it keeps falling out of your head as soon as you get near it. That's what happens to me. I start thinking, I think I've seen it, John. No, it's gone again. Can we go back in the beginning with the word? No, it's gone again. It says, remember, Chris, you're not going to understand this. But that doesn't mean that it's beyond you. It just means you won't comprehend it. A bit like the ocean floor in the middle of the Atlantic. You ain't going to swim there. You're not going to think your way through this. It's not going to all fit together in some neat formula. That's not about to happen. It's just true. And what's happening to you is you're seeing that it's true. You're not understanding it. You're seeing the truth of it. Or more excitingly, actually, Chris, this epic truth is taking hold of you. And you are become caught up in it. You haven't grasped it and put it in your head along with your other knowledge. It's different to that. You're being into this knowledge that's too big for you to hold in your head. And that's who the baby of Bethlehem is. It's absolutely, epically amazing that the God who is with God in the beginning now is Emmanuel, God with us. So God with God becomes God with us, and that's Jesus, a baby in Bethlehem's manger. So many ways to try and say this, so I'll share a few with you. That in Jesus, heaven is at last on earth, unseparated. Heaven is at last happening right there in the manger of Bethlehem. Right there in a piece of biology, right there in a human being, a human baby. In Jesus, this baby, there is no separation of the spiritual and the physical that people so often like to try and separate. Well, there's spiritual truth and physical truth. Okay, no, there isn't. There's either truth or there's falsehood. Right? God hasn't invented spiritual things and physical things. God's invented stuff. God's created. It's either true or it's not true. And here is truth. Here is truth in the most amazing form, where the spiritual is one with the physical, and the physical is one with the spiritual, not separated at all. Right there, lying in that manger, that's what you're looking at. The eternal has reached the present. It's right here in the now of human history. The transcendent, beyond our comprehension, beyond our thought, beyond what is limited to the physics of the universe, the transcendent is found right now in the manger of Bethlehem in a physical form. Manger's a really good thing as a cot for a baby, because right now we have a baby lying in the manger, and the manger's a good size, because the manger aren't just hugely big. Probably wouldn't get me in one, right? But they're great for babies, right? Because the eternal word is about that long right now, right? You can weigh and work out how heavy he was when he was born, except they didn't do it. It's just a pity, isn't it? Oh, glad tidings of great joy, and he weighs 8 pounds 6 ounces. Nothing like that. But he does have a weight. He does have a length. He does, he's going to learn stuff. Amazing, great power. The power to create the universe has turned up in a manger, in a stable or a cave or an outhouse of some sort. Who'd have thought that? Who'd have worked that one out? But there it is, the greatest power possible can only lie there and hope that somebody notices his nappy needs changing. Can only lie there and hope that somebody does something when he's hungry. Because the only way he knows how to communicate hunger right now is the same way he needs to communicate that his nappy needs changing, or that there's a thorn sticking through the swaddling clothes and is unpleasant, or whatever, because he can't speak yet. He can just cry. He's newborn. He's not even ready to smile properly unless he's got wind. This is the one through whom all things are created. He can't even say, "Excuse me, could you give me a hand over here?" He hasn't learned language yet. He can't even crawl. He can't do a thing for himself but breathe. The Creator has become the clay of creation, has entered into human life. There's a perfect unity between God and people lying right there in that manger. And it's called incarnation, if you want the technical word. Means enfleshed or inbiologied, most literally. Incarnation, turned up in a body. Extraordinary. But that's it, folks, and that's exactly what we need. Now, as a community of disciples, we do two things. Have you noticed that all preachers cheat, by the way? When they've got 3 points to make, they tell you there's 2. Right? That's what I just did. because I'm actually smuggling in the fact that the first thing we do is form a community, right? So we form this community and we follow Jesus. That's the point. Okay. The first thing that we do is that we worship. And worship engages mystery. Worship goes where John chapter 1 verse 1 takes us. In the beginning, what beginning? Before time, beyond space. The beginning where God is. Oh, that. But I don't get any of that, no. So we'll sing about it. We'll talk about it. We'll pray about it. We will perceive it with our spirit, even though we cannot anchor it with our clear thinking. It's a mystery. It's transcendent. And we worship in that sphere of transcendence. Do we get that? You see, worship's not reciting the Lord's Prayer or singing this song or that song because it says Jesus in the middle of it or something like that. That's not worship. Those are the rituals of worship. Worship is where we engage with the eternal God in love, adoration, and wonder. And we meet in sacred assembly so that we can do some of that together and sometimes help one another, because sometimes on our own we lose the wonder and so forth. So we meet to worship, not to sing songs and recite prayers, but to worship. We're a community of worshipping people who look up at the sky sometimes or who capture that beautiful smell of freshly baked mince pies. And we go, by it, God, you're grand. That's what I'm talking about. That's the stuff. Or something happens and we go, God, you are great. You are special. You are wonderful. And I love you to bits. And I worship you. That's worship. That kind of stuff, yeah? And the second thing we do, because there's only two things we do, is action that cradles Christ in the manger of the everyday. See, I love the manger and in a crib scene. Well, I haven't got one just handy this year, but I love the manger in a crib scene. Why? Well, because the manger, we imagine, will have been made out of wood, and we're almost certain to be right about that. So it grew there as part of plant life and was harvested by somebody and turned into wood that you can work. And then it was made, whatever size it was made, but something like that big, yeah? And it was made as a food trough for animals. That's what it's for. You can't get much more earthy than that. Much further from in the beginning. It's so everyday. And they make quite good cots or cradles. Do mangers. Fill them up with a bit of hay, insulation. Wrap baby in some swaddling clothes. Place them in the manger. The result is a warm and comfortable baby, hopefully, in a secured place. But it's physical. It's very ordinary. It's been manufactured. It's been put together for the purposes of feeding animals, and now God's in it. God's there. Because God likes a manger that is practical. Jesus comes to live in the real world and to help the real world with our real problems. And that's what we do. Oh, it's got a name, by the way. We call it mission. It's where you put the gospel into action instead of words, alongside the words. Yeah? It's where you put the gospel into action. So we act, and as we act as Christ's disciples, the Spirit of God within us, the Spirit of Christ poured out upon us, means that the action of Christ is continued in this physical and real world that right now is facing some very, very serious problems. And the manger is where we act for the good, act for the glory of God, an act for the love of neighbour. That's the manger, the physical place of Jesus. And you and I live in it all the time. And there's a manger in your everyday life. There's a manger in our national life. There's a manger in our global life. It's the place where Christ has come and is placed for the good of all. And one day, as we grow up in this following Jesus thing, the penny suddenly drops. And we realize that you don't have two things, worship and action. They're exactly the same thing. They're not separated any more than the word that did the action of creation is separate from God. They're not separate at all. That is all just loving God with everything and your neighbour as yourself. It's all just worship and it's all just action. They're not distinct from each other. They are the light shining in the darkness. And the darkness has never extinguished that light, and it won't, because the light is stronger than the darkness. And the truth is stronger than the falsehood and the lies. And the love is the love of resurrection. It's more powerful than death itself. And Christmas is a time to go, there he is, look. Jesus, born biological like I was born one of us, to bring us the message of God, to be the message of God, and to make us practical disciples in our worship of him. Never before has the world so urgently needed Christmas. It's the most relevant message in the world today. And it's our message. And it's our joy. And it's our something to share with others. Father God, when I try to think about these things, I don't do very well. I think that might have shown a bit this morning. It's beyond me. I would never know how to think about you in eternity. And I would never have guessed that you would show up in human life, God as a human being. But there it is. I don't know what to say, except I worship you. Please show me what to do. Amen.